Michael walked briskly in the early morning chill. He was trying to escape the scene of the crime without trying to look like he was escaping. He had just thrown a rock and broke the stone statue in the garden of Old Lady Winters. He hadn't meant for the rock to strike the statue. He rather liked it. It was almost erotic in its dainty, feminine figure. There was even the subtle hint of anatomical correctness to it in the nipple and crotch areas. Not to mention the perfect proportioning of the waist, hips and rear. The breasts appeared to be smooth, taut and firm. Well, marble was about as firm as one could get. The face was angelic in its innocence and beauty. She truly was a sight to behold. To say he was more than a little disappointed by the recent turn of events would be an understatement. He had meant to hit a blue jay that had been annoying him all morning. He didn't even want to do the bird any real harm. He just wanted to scare it away for good. Its incessant call was striking a nerve with Michael and interfering with his morning activities. He had chased it into Winter's garden, but there it just flew from tree to tree taunting him. He could almost sense it laughing at him. As he fled, he could hear the startled cries of the old woman who was rumored to dabble in the black arts. She surely had noticed that her precious centerpiece was rendered garbage. The stone had cut the beauty's nose clean off. It was truly amazing that such a subtle flaw could attract so much attention. Michael knew how much it distracted from the sculpture. He had seen it. As he headed up his walk, he stole a glance over his shoulder and almost stopped dead in his tracks. Old Lady Winters was looking right at him. He tried to turn away nonchalantly as though he had nothing to hide. He could feel her eyes trained on his back, boring holes into it. It was as though she were looking into his very soul. He rationalized that it was impossible for her to do since there was no such thing as magic. He had already chalked the rumors about her to be just that, rumors. He continued on into his house and tried to settle back down to his work. For the rest of the morning, he couldn't shake the feeling of restlessness. He just couldn't seem to settle down and concentrate on what he was doing. His mind just kept going back to the beautiful statue that he had single-handedly disfigured. By mid-afternoon, he had given up on trying to get anything accomplished and decided to go out for a walk to try to calm himself. It was much warmer now that the sun had reached its apex, so he left his coat behind and walked out the door into the lovely May afternoon. He decided that it would also be best if he avoided the area in question, so he casually walked off in the opposite direction. Soon, he was deep in thought as he walked, not really paying any attention to where he was going. He thought about the events of that morning, and he thought about how he would miss seeing the beauty standing in the center of that garden. His thoughts were suddenly interrupted by someone talking to him. "Hello? Michael, isn't it?" He looking in the direction of the voice, and it was Old Lady Winters. He had somehow managed to walk right past her yard. Hello." He managed to answer. "Yes, it is Michael. You know, I made a terrible discovery this morning." She said. "You did?" He asked, trying to act surprised. "Yes." She noted. "It seems that some vandal has broken my statue's nose clean off." "Oh, that's terrible." He acted in stunned surprise. "What makes you think it was a vandal?" "Well, I am sure that if someone had done it by accident, they would have notified me to apologize." "What if it was an accident and the person realized that there was any damage?" He asked innocently. "Oh, I suspect that the person who did it knew that there was damage to the statue. Perhaps the person is afraid of what might happen if they were to admit to it?" He inquired. "What might happen over an accident?" She answered with a question. "Who knows anymore? People have been known to take offense and the slightest thing anymore and seek revenge, ranging from harassment to physical violence. All over accidents less than this." I have heard of two men working together all morning and shooting it out over a bicycle left in a driveway by mid-afternoon. He said cautiously. Well, I am sure that I would not harm anyone over a harmless accident. Malicious vandalism is another matter altogether. That is why I say that the person who did this must have done it on purpose. She defended. I am only pointing out that it may not have been done intentionally. He rationalized. Do you know anything about this? She asked directly. He knew she had seen him this morning, so pretending to know nothing about it at all might be hanging himself. He replied. I thought I heard something this morning when I was outside, but that is all I know. Her expression never changed. She still wore the subtle smile she had greeted him with. She said, That is too bad. I shall have to replace the statue, and I would have liked to make the guilty party pay for a new one. Perhaps I will catch them sooner or later. Maybe, he said, with a sigh of relief. She bought his story about knowing very little about it. He was actually feeling pretty confident about removing suspicion that he even helped her remove the statue from its pedestal and place it in the garage when she asked him for help. He figured that it would even help cover his tracks a little better, since the guilty party wouldn't be willing to hang around long enough for her to get suspicious. By sticking around, her suspicions would be averted because she would think that if he were guilty that he would not want to help her out. It didn't take too long, but the statue weighed a lot more than he had imagined it would have. He actually broke a sweat moving it. After it was safely in the garage, she invited him in for a cup of coffee. He normally wouldn't have accepted a hot drink on a warm day, but she was offering, and he did want to put her more at ease about his involvement, and he seemed to suddenly develop a taste for coffee at that moment, so he agreed. He had just finished the last of the coffee in his cup and stood up to leave, feeling as though he could now get back to work without his mind drifting. As he thanked her and made his way to the door, he began to feel stiff in his joints. With each step, his movements became more and more restricted until he could barely move at all. He soon realized that even his restricted movements were slowing to a halt. He had but to reach out and turn the knob and open the door, and he would be free of this woman. Seconds ticked as his hand slowly moved less than half an inch. Then the movement slowed to a quiver. Old Lady Winters sat watching the whole scenario play itself out. She waited until even the quiver stopped. Then she stood up and walked to where Michael was standing. I'm afraid that you won't be going anywhere anytime soon, she said with a giggle. She reached into a nearby drawer and retrieved a pair of scissors and began cutting up the sleeve of Michael's shirt. She began talking to him as she worked. You see, it wasn't bad enough that you broke my statue. Then you wouldn't even own up to it. I knew it was an accident. All I wanted was an apology, perhaps an offer to help replace it, but an apology would have sufficed. I waited until I saw you later in the day, and again you would not admit to your transgression. Then, to add insult to injury, you boldly denied not only having anything to do with it, but even knowing anything about it. This angered me more than anything else you might have done. It was then that I decided that you would take her place in the garden. By this time, she had removed his shirt and undershirt and was now working on cutting his pants off of him. Oh, don't worry, I can repair Starlet. It is but a small task. I think as a reward for being such a faithful guardian of my garden, I will allow her to live your life. As the female she is, of course. It also a small matter for me to change everyone's thinking to believe that Michelle, not Michael, was living up the street. Your mother will not remember having a son, but a daughter. You, on the other hand, will replace Starlet as the guardian of my garden. There really is nothing for you to guard against, since you would be powerless to prevent anything from happening. You will just be there to add atmosphere to it. She had finished removing his underpants as well as his shoes and socks. She touched his forehead and his body started moving on its own and followed her down the stairs and into the basement of her home. When he was where she wanted him, she touched his forehead again and all movements stopped. Not that it mattered since he had no control over his movements anyway. Now he was scared. He was learning the truth in the rumors and it was not a pleasant lesson. He could only hope that she was just trying to scare him a little. Surely, she would not want his tall manly self to dominate her garden. He would tower over everything. That must be it. He thought to himself. She must be trying to frighten me. In a little while, she'll release me from this spell and warn me not to cross her again. I will then apologize and be on my merry way. Getting home will be a little tough since she cut my clothes up, but I'm sure I could manage. Then I will move far away from this place and never look back. If it was fear she wanted to instill in Michael, she was doing an excellent job. Not being able to move on his own was bad enough, but all her talk about making him become a statue in her yard was scaring the hell out of him. She stood in front of him and raised her hands and began to speak very softly. He could barely hear that she was speaking, let alone what she was saying. She had moved slightly to the side and he could still see her out of the corner of his eye. He also noticed that he could see his reflection in a large mirror on the wall. He tried to calm himself down a little by once again rationalizing his situation and comparing it to the laws of possibilities. There is no way she could turn me into a marble statue. I am human after all. It's impossible to turn living tissue into stone. Oh sure, I can move a muscle on my own, but that is because she slipped me a Mickey. She must have put some kind of drug into my coffee to cause temporary paralyses. She must have touched a pressure point to get my body to respond. Very soon, I will regain control of my body and she will have to confess that it was all a hoax to frighten me into apologizing. As she continued to make chanting sounds, he noticed that he felt like he was being crushed. No, more like compressed. He focused on his reflection in the mirror and discovered that he was now about the same height as the woman standing next to him. It was then that he noticed that the reflection of the woman next to him appeared to be extremely old and even looked decrepit. Out of the corner of his eye, he focused on the woman and she looked just as she had when she first spoke to him this afternoon. She looked to be in her mid to late 50s and most, yet the image in the mirror looked ancient. I focused his attention on his image in the mirror and found that it was now slightly smaller than that of the woman's. Not only was his stature smaller, but the rest of his body appeared to have shrunk symmetrically with his height. He still had the same proportions, they were just smaller in size. He continued to watch as his reflection continued to shrink. It soon became apparent his reflection was nearly a foot shorter than the woman's reflection and the rest of it stayed in proportion. Soon it was closer to 2 feet smaller. He guessed that would make it about 3 foot tall, about the same height as the statue that the woman called Starlet. Finally the woman stopped her chanting and he sensed more than see that she was tired. He heard her step away from him and heard what he guessed to be a chair leg scrape on the floor. He heard the chair slightly groan as though it didn't want to be sat on and he figured that she must have sat down to take a rest. He had been standing there for quite some time and estimated it to have been about an hour to an hour and a half. Funny. He thought again. Whatever it was should be wearing off by now. Fear was beginning to grip him once again. His thoughts were interrupted by the woman talking. Well, we're about halfway finished. She was out of breath. What's the matter? Nothing to say? Her breath was coming a little easier now. Oh, why would I think you anything to say now? You're more afraid of me now than you were before. Besides, it's not as though you could answer me if you wanted to, huh? She stood up and walked in front of him. He was finally able to see her. It was then that he found true terror, because he could now see that she really was 2 feet taller than him. Somehow, she had shrunk him down to the size of the statue he carried from the garden. This was really happening to me. His mind screamed. She is really turning me into a statue. Oh no! Now what? No, wait. He tried to collect himself. I am still human. This is probably just one of the influences of the drug she slipped into my coffee. This can't be real. Can it? He continued to stand there frozen. Then again, what else could he do? She said, "Okay? Ready for the next part?" She waited a moment and answered for him. "Ready as you'll ever be?" "Okay then, let's get started, shall we?" She giggled again. She reached out and took hold of his manhood and whispered something under her breath. He could feel himself become erect. He could also see it in the mirror. Then she raised her hands over their heads and once again began to chant. It began as a burning pain in his lower stomach and quickly spread to his crotch and then to his stiff member. He wanted to double over, but was powerless to do so. All he could do to not lose consciousness was to concentrate on his reflection in the mirror. He watched in horror as his penis began to lose even more size than it had when he had shrunk. It was still hard, but continued to get smaller. He also noticed that his scrotum was shriveling. As his penis continued to melt away, his scrotum began to take on a different look. It seemed to be stretching further between his legs and then appeared to be separating as his penis became only a nub that looked as though it was slipping between the folds that his scrotum had become. It wasn't long afterwards that he began to recognize it. His mind reeled. Oh no, not a pussy. I've got a pussy. He whined in his mind, still unable to utter a sound. This has to be an illusion, he told himself. The reasoning was beginning to lose its weight. It was becoming apparent, even to him, that he was becoming a female the same size and shape as Starlet. He felt his waist constrict and an expanding feeling shrouded his hips and buttocks. He felt a sensation that was hard to describe run through his legs and feet. Then the same sensation traveled up his torso and was replaced by the feeling of expanding in his chest. He watched in the mirror as twin mounds began to swell on each half of his chest. As they swelled, his nipples expanded and took on more definition. They were also rigid. Finally, the swelling ebbed and there were 2 smallish, firm breasts capped with expressive nipples. Tits! I have tits! He cried to no one but himself. Will this humiliation never end? The odd sensation returned, moving up his chest and down each arm, leaving feminine smoothness in its wake. His limbs became delicate and fingernails took on a slightly longer feminine shape. Then it slithered up his neck and he could feel it spread out over his face as he felt and watched his facial features soften and become finer. They could even be described as dainty. He looked at the reflection and saw that he was not a copy of Starlet. His features were different. If he had to compare them, he would say that they were even more alluring than Starlet's. He felt an itching in his scalp and felt a slight tickling on his back and shoulders. He checked the mirror to confirm what he already knew. His hair was growing out. He thought it would have been blonde, but it remained the same dark brown it had been when ordeal began. It cascaded down his small shoulders and stopped just short of the middle of his back. If he was still able to move, he would be paralyzed in shock. He couldn't believe he had become the beautiful creature reflected in the mirror. As things settled down, he felt his hips shift a little to change his center of balance as they tilted slightly forward. The woman once again stepped away from him and found her seat. He could hear her breathing hard without her talking to him this time. While she rested, he studied himself in the mirror. This is unbelievable. I have become a vision of loveliness. He thought as he took it all in, from his long wavy hair to his dainty feet. He was now the epitome of femininity. He was now a she with an innocent-looking beauty. He was a little frantic seeing that she had not only shrunk him, but changed his sex as well. He tried not to think about it. He knew that they had been there quite some time during his gender change. Finally, she stood up and touched his forehead. Come, my child. It is time for you to take your place in the garden. He followed her up the stairs and out the back door of her house. Night had fallen, and it was under the cover of darkness that she led him to the pedestal and directed him to stand on it. She touched his forehead again, and he stood still. She posed him the way she wanted and stepped back and waved her hand toward the wall of the house, and a mirror appeared. He wanted to die when he saw that she had arranged him in the same feminine pose as his predecessor for all the world to see. She raised her hands and chanted again, only shorter this time. Then she lowered her hands and said, In the morning we'll see who is the kook, my little marble beauty. Oh, you are right, you're not marble now, but tomorrow. She turned and walked back into the house. It was a long night for Michael. By the light of the moon, he could see his complexion becoming lighter and lighter. Soon his skin began to take on a polished sheen. The sun was coming up when he realized that the mirror on the house reflected a marble statue of female sensuality. He was now a she, and she was made of stone. If she could have cried, she would have. There was no denying it now, with her sex on display for the world. A short time later, Old Lady Winters came out to admire her new centerpiece. She walked around the small statue a couple of times and finally said, Well, you sure did turn out nice. I am really pleased with my sculpting this time. Oh, don't worry, it won't be so bad. You'll get used to it after a while, and who knows, my anger with you may dissipate in a year or two, you never know. She turned and walked into the garage. By late afternoon, she emerged and went into the house for a few minutes and went back to the garage. Several minutes later, two women exited the garage and walked over to the statue on the pedestal. Mrs. Winters, I am so sorry for what I did all those years ago. I am just glad it is over, and thank you for my new life. The young woman, who strongly resembled the statue Michael had broken, looked up at her replacement and said to the older woman, She really is lovely. I agree, you really outdid yourself on this one. She seemed to think for a moment and added, You know, I remember who this was. He couldn't seem to get enough of looking at me. I'm sure she'll enjoy looking at herself in the mirror for a while. What have you named her? The older woman thought a moment and said, She is so beautiful, I'd like to name her something very pretty to match her looks. I know. She's as pretty as a lily. Her name is Lily. The young woman smiled and curtsied. Pleased to meet you, Lily. I hope you will not only have a pleasant stay in the garden, but a short one as well. On that note, the women went into the house, and a short time later, the young woman known as Michelle left, and Lily watched her walk to her new home. Lily did learn to enjoy her new lot in life, at least until the day that she too could leave the garden. Even if she had to leave as a female, it would be blessing enough. Day in and day out, she watched Mrs. Winters putter around in her garden. She was grateful that the annoying blue jay that had led to her demise had chosen to move on. That was a small blessing in itself. She watched as spring turned into summer and the garden came into full bloom. She enjoyed the smells of all the different flowers. After a time, the mirror had been removed. She thought it was nice not to have to look at herself all the time. Of course, it didn't really matter at that point since her new image was burned into her mind. She knew what she looked like, and although she had gotten used to it, she still found it embarrassing to be a man and female stone body and the fact that she was now just a thing that didn't even have human worth. Michelle was still a frequent visitor to the garden, and she would chatter away to Lily for hours. Poor Lily viewed it with mixed emotions. She really enjoyed the company, but she hated hearing about how her life was being lived by someone else. Soon, summer turned into fall, and that was soon followed by winter. Both of those seasons were very lonely because as the weather grew colder, both Mrs. Winters and Michelle's visits grew shorter and less frequent until they were almost non-existent through the winter. Finally, the weather broke and snow faded to be replaced by the greens of spring once again. Michelle and Mrs. Winters began to return to the garden. During one of Michelle's visits, she told Lily that Mrs. Winters had ordered a carved statue to take her place and that she would soon be free of her pedestal. Of course, she wouldn't be able to return to her old life, but one would be provided for her. After such a long time, Lily finally had something to look forward to. She waited and watched. A couple of weeks later, a large van pulled into the driveway and unloaded a large crate and took into the garage. It was still rather cold outside, so visits by either Michelle or Mrs. Winters were still occasional. So it hadn't surprised her when no one came to help her down. It was a few weeks later when she heard a lot of commotion in the front of the house, but she couldn't see around it to find out what was happening. Several weeks passed and spring had given way to summer once again. She wondered if she had been forgotten since she hadn't heard from anyone in such a long time. She knew that it was much warmer now, and Michelle or Mrs. Winters should have been out in the garden by now. The flowers had come up on their own, and the garden still looked pretty good for not being tended to. She was actually starting to worry that something had happened to one of them more than getting freed. Summer was in full swing when Michelle finally appeared. Her eyes were red. It was obvious that she had been crying. She explained that Father Time had finally caught up with Mrs. Winters and that she had died about a month before. She had many things to do as she was the executor for the estate, so she hadn't been able to come to the garden. She also explained that she did not have the power Mrs. Winters had, so Lily was therefore stuck as a female nude statue. She said that she had even more bad news. It seemed that a great-nephew had inherited the house and garden and was planning to move in with his family within the week. The nephew's wife had seen Lily from the window and took an instant dislike to her full frontal nudity. Michelle tried to obtain Lily, but the wife would have none of that. She didn't want that statue in the same neighborhood that her children were going to live in, so the nephew had sold Lily to a museum of art. As soon as Michelle had finished laying all that out onto poor Lily, a truck backed into the driveway and two men got out and came over to where Lily stood. "Excuse me, Mississippi," one of them said to Michelle. "Is the statue?" Michelle said that it was, and the younger man said, "Whoa, what a babe! Too bad she's not real." The other one said, "Never mind. Let's get this thing out of here and to the museum. I got a date with a real woman." They picked Lily up and carried her to the van. The younger man didn't miss the chance to cop a feel. To him it was just smooth marble. To Lily it was a mixture of pleasure and embarrassment. She loaded into the van where the younger man had as much of his way with her as he could. At the museum, she was unloaded and placed on a pedestal in a small garden outside. As the van drove away, Lily could hear the call of a blue jay. It got louder and louder until she felt it perch on her upturned hand. She looked at it and recognized its markings as the one she chased over a year ago. It looked her in the eye and then made a sound like it was laughing. She realized that somehow it seemed to know who she was, or who she had been, and it was now mocking her. She looked past that infernal bird, only to see her own naked reflection in the mirrored glass of the museum. She thought, "Now I know hell had come early for me." The jay continued its taunting laugh.